Before we begin, if you enjoy documentary stories about World War II, please support this channel with a like and leave a comment below. It helps this video reach more people who care about history. And now, let's go back to the morning of December 7th, 1941, when one explosion turned the USS Arizona into one of the most tragic symbols of Pearl Harbor. The explosion that shocked America. Her massive guns could throw heavy shells miles across the sea. Her armor was designed to survive brutal naval combat. Her crew believed they were serving aboard a giant of steel. But on that quiet Sunday morning, USS Arizona would become something far greater than a warship. She would become the most tragic symbol of Pearl Harbor. And in just a few minutes, one explosion would shock an entire nation. Before the attack, Pearl Harbor was one of the most important American naval bases in the Pacific. Its location made it a strategic shield between the United States and the growing power of Japan. The Pacific Fleet was based there to deter aggression and to project American strength across the ocean. But Pearl Harbor had a weakness. Many of the battleships were anchored close together. They were not at sea. They were not moving. Their crews were relaxed. Their anti-aircraft defenses were not fully ready. Most people believed that if war came, there would be warning. On the morning of December 7, 1941, the United States was still at peace. In Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, the day began like any other Sunday. The water was calm, the sky was clear. Sailors were waking up, preparing for breakfast, cleaning their ships, writing letters, or getting ready for church service. Across the harbor, the American Pacific Fleet rested at anchor, lined up along Ford Island in a place known as Battleship Row. Among those ships was USS Arizona. She was not the newest battleship in the American fleet. She had been launched during the First World War and had already served for more than 2 decades. But she was still powerful, still respected, and still a symbol of American naval strength. Japan saw something different. For months, Japanese planners had studied the harbor. They knew where the battleships were usually anchored. They knew that a sudden strike could destroy American naval power before the United States had time to react. The plan was bold, risky, and ruthless. The Japanese attack force crossed the Pacific in secrecy. Aircraft carriers carried hundreds of planes toward Hawaii. Their mission was simple: strike first, strike hard, and cripple the Pacific Fleet. At first, the morning gave almost no sign of what was coming. Then, just before 8 a.m., aircraft appeared over Oahu. At first, some people thought they were American planes. Others stared in confusion as low-flying aircraft moved toward the harbor. But then the markings became visible. Red circles on the wings. Japanese planes. Seconds later, bombs began to fall. Torpedo bombers came in low over the water. Dive bombers screamed down from the sky. Fighters strafed airfields, hangars, parked aircraft, and men running for cover. Explosions tore across the island. Smoke began to rise from ships and runways. Pearl Harbor was under attack. On Battleship Row, the first moments were chaos. Sailors ran to battle stations. Officers shouted orders. Anti-aircraft guns tried to come alive. Men who had been sleeping moments earlier were suddenly thrown into war. Some were still in white uniforms. Some were barefoot. Some had no idea what was happening until the ship beneath them shook. USS Arizona was moored near Ford Island, with the repair ship Vestal tied alongside her. Arizona's crew began responding to the attack, but everything happened incredibly fast. Japanese aircraft were already overhead. At around 8:06 a.m., a high-altitude bomber released a weapon that would change history. The bomb fell toward USS Arizona. It was not an ordinary bomb. It was believed to be a modified armor-piercing shell, designed to punch through the deck of a battleship before detonating. It came down almost vertically, cutting through the morning air, heading for the forward part of the ship. Then it struck. The bomb penetrated Arizona's deck near the forward magazines, where large amounts of ammunition and powder were stored for the ship's main guns. For a moment, there may have been only the impact. Then the ship exploded. The blast was catastrophic. A huge fireball erupted from the forward section of USS Arizona. Steel plates were ripped apart. The ship's bow was torn open. The forward magazines detonated with unimaginable force. In an instant, a battleship weighing tens of thousands of tons was transformed into a burning ruin. The explosion was so powerful that people across the harbor saw it and felt it. Flames shot high into the sky. Thick black smoke poured upward. Burning debris was thrown through the air. Men were killed instantly. Others were trapped below decks, with no chance to escape. The blast lifted parts of the ship apart from the inside. The forward superstructure collapsed. The hull twisted. Fires spread rapidly. Oil from the ship poured into the harbor and caught fire on the surface of the water. Men who jumped overboard found themselves surrounded by flames. For those nearby, it was not just an explosion. It was the moment Pearl Harbor became a nightmare. USS Arizona had taken a fatal hit. Many of the men inside the ship never knew what happened. They were killed in a fraction of a second. Others were trapped in darkness, smoke, heat, and twisted metal. Some compartments flooded, others burned, escape routes disappeared, ladders were destroyed, doors jammed shut. The ship was not simply damaged. She was dying. Across Battleship Row, other ships were also under attack. USS Oklahoma capsized after taking multiple torpedo hits. USS West Virginia was struck and sank in shallow water. USS California, USS Nevada, USS Tennessee, and USS Maryland were hit or damaged. The entire harbor was filled with smoke, fire, shouting, and the sound of aircraft engines. But Arizona's destruction stood apart. The scale of the explosion was different. The loss of life was different. In a single moment, more than 1,000 men aboard USS Arizona were lost or doomed. By the end of the attack, 177 officers and crewmen from the ship would be dead. It was nearly half of all American lives lost at Pearl Harbor. And that is why USS Arizona became the heart of the tragedy. The men who survived remembered the explosion for the rest of their lives. Some were thrown across decks by the force of the blast. Some were burned. Some were blown into the water. Others were aboard nearby ships and watched Arizona erupt in fire. Many described the sound as something beyond words, not just a blast, but a deep, violent roar that seemed to tear the world apart. The ship's mast, guns, and structures were swallowed by smoke. Flames consumed the forward decks. Ammunition cooked off in the heat. The water around the ship burned with oil. Rescue efforts began quickly, but in many places there was almost nothing anyone could do. Men tried to pull survivors from the water. Boats moved through burning oil. Sailors risked their lives to help the wounded. Some survivors from Arizona were rescued from the stern, which had not been destroyed as completely as the forward section. Others escaped by swimming through fire and smoke. But most of the men trapped in the forward part of the ship could not be reached. The damage was too severe. The fire was too intense. The ship had become a tomb. As the attack continued, the Japanese planes completed their strike and turned away. In less than 2 hours, Pearl Harbor had been devastated. American battleships were sunk or burning. Aircraft were destroyed on the ground. Thousands of men were dead or wounded. But the most haunting image was USS Arizona. A battleship that had once represented strength now lay shattered in the shallow water, still burning, still smoking, still leaking oil. The explosion did not just destroy a ship, it changed the United States. Before December 7th, many Americans wanted to stay out of the war. The conflict in Europe had already consumed countries and cities, but for many in the United States, the war still felt distant. Pearl Harbor ended that distance in one morning. The attack shocked the American public. Newspapers carried images and headlines of destruction. Radio broadcasts spread the news across the country. Families waited in fear to learn whether their sons, brothers, husbands, and fathers were alive. The name Pearl Harbor became a wound, and USS Arizona became the deepest part of that wound. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed Congress. He called December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States declared war on Japan. Soon after, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, and America entered the Second World War fully. The sleeping giant had awakened. But beneath the politics and strategy, beneath the declarations and headlines, there were the men of USS Arizona. Young sailors who had expected a normal Sunday. Men who had eaten their last breakfast without knowing it. Men who never got to write another letter home. Men who were still inside the ship. After the attack, salvage crews examined the wreck. Some ships at Pearl Harbor were raised, repaired, and returned to service. Several battleships would fight again later in the war. But USS Arizona was different. The damage was too massive. The forward part of the ship was destroyed beyond repair. Her magazines had exploded. Her structure was torn apart. The cost and difficulty of raising her completely were too great, and more importantly, the wreck had become the resting place of hundreds of her crew. So Arizona remained where she sank. Over time, most of the visible superstructure was removed. Guns and equipment were salvaged when possible. But the main hull stayed beneath the water. Even today, USS Arizona remains in Pearl Harbor. She is not just a wreck, she is a grave. More than 900 men are still entombed inside the ship. Their names are remembered at the memorial built above the wreck. Visitors stand in silence over the sunken battleship, looking down at the water where the outline of the ship can still be seen. Oil still rises from the wreck in small drops. People call them the tears of Arizona. Those drops have been appearing for decades, slowly surfacing from the ship below. They are a haunting reminder that the past is still there, just beneath the water. The USS Arizona Memorial does not sit directly on the ship as if conquering it. It floats above it, quiet and white, bridging the wreck without touching it. Inside, the names of the dead are inscribed on a marble wall. For many visitors, it is one of the most emotional places in America. Because the story of USS Arizona is not only about war, it is about sudden loss. It is about ordinary men caught in an extraordinary moment. It is about how quickly history can change. One minute, Pearl Harbor was calm. The next, the sky was full of aircraft. One minute, USS Arizona was a battleship at anchor. The next, she was burning, broken, and sinking. The explosion that destroyed Arizona also became a symbol of American shock, anger, and resolve. It helped unite a divided country. It became one of the defining images of the Second World War. And it ensured that Pearl Harbor would never be remembered as just a military defeat. It would be remembered as a national tragedy. But there is another reason the story still matters. USS Arizona reminds us that behind every famous event are individual lives. The history books say 177 men died on Arizona. But that number was made of real people. Sailors from small towns and big cities, men who had families waiting at home, young recruits who had barely begun their service, officers who tried to save their ship, friends who died beside each other before they even understood the scale of the attack. For their families, the explosion did not end on December 7th. It continued in telegrams, funerals without bodies, unanswered letters, and empty chairs at home. That is why USS Arizona remains powerful. Not because she was the biggest ship, not because she fired the most shots, not because she won a battle, but because her destruction captured the human cost of a nation being pulled into war. The attack on Pearl Harbor was designed to break American power in the Pacific. For a short time, it succeeded in causing terrible damage, but it failed in a larger sense. Instead of breaking American will, it hardened it. The United States rebuilt, mobilized, and fought across the Pacific for nearly 4 years. From the Coral Sea to Midway, from Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima, from the Philippines to Okinawa, the war that followed was brutal and vast. But for many Americans, it began with one image: a burning battleship, a column of smoke, the shattered remains of USS Arizona. Today, when people visit Pearl Harbor, they often speak more quietly as they approach the memorial. The harbor is peaceful again. The water is calm again. The sky is bright again. But the silence is different now. It is the silence of memory. Below the surface, Arizona still rests where she fell. Her hull is covered by water, time, and history. But her story has not disappeared. It continues every time someone reads the names, every time a visitor sees the oil rising from the wreck, every time December 7th is remembered. USS Arizona was built as a weapon of war, but she became something else: a warning, a memorial, a grave, and a symbol of the morning when America changed forever. The explosion that destroyed USS Arizona lasted only seconds, but the shock it sent through America has lasted for generations. The USS Arizona still rests at Pearl Harbor today, not only as a wreck, but as a memory. Thank you for watching this story. If you believe these moments should not be forgotten, leave a like, write a comment, and subscribe for more World War II documentaries. See you in the next episode.